Thank you so much, and good morning, and afternoon, and evening to everyone around wherever they are participating from. Let me just start by saying I'm absolutely delighted to be here at this forum, even though it's virtually, but that's become the norm. Because I feel that the 2020 Rome Charter resonates very deeply with my own understanding, both of cultural rights as human rights, but also regarding the vital role that culture has in terms of how we even conceive of rights and the implementation, how these are enjoyed or not, how we conceive of development, how we sometimes deny rights to others. All of this is very closely linked with the whole cultural body. And it's clear, of course, that rights can only be enjoyed and development can only take place in specific socio-economic context with all that it implies in terms of the factors and the dynamics that exist in that location. And these are contingent upon that include your local knowledge, your traditions, your practices, your cultural values. So I like to say that to me, culture is like a prism through which we perceive, react to, interact with, and give meaning to the world around us, whether that is in terms of other people, it is in terms of the natural environment or the manufactured environment, all of this. And of course, in turn, we are perceived by other people's through other people's prisms of culture, and that will determine how they see us and how they interact and react to us. So, culture, as the Charter says, to me, is how we give our life meaning. And it is cultural rights, in my view, that bridge the civil and political rights on the one hand and social economic rights on the other. And in some senses, I really do believe, not just because I was a special rapporteur on the subject, and I hope Yvonne will agree with me, that in many ways, cultural rights are the crux of enjoying all other social, economic, political, civic rights. If you do not have this, we will not move forward. And it is because it is through the prism of culture that we understand what rights are and that we will implement them according to what it is, and that we understand what development is and what development should be. And so, culture also, of course, very importantly, tells us who we are and who the other is and how to interact with them. So, but it also leaves open the scope of who I could be. And I think that's where the capabilities comes in. But I have to say that COVID-19, the pandemic, has really shaken up our prisms of cultural understanding. And it's profoundly disrupted the world as we knew it, we were familiar with, we thought we knew how to deal with and engage with. The pandemic and its fallout have rendered many of the signposts for our cultural parameters and guidelines meaningless. It's shaken up things to such an extent that you have the very core of human existence has been impacted. How we greet each other, how we welcome new life, how we say goodbye to life. All of those are profoundly everyday human interactions which have been affected. So, in disrupting the everyday interactions, the pandemic has kind of pushed us in trying to make sense of new realities that we were unprepared for. We have been catapulted into this. And so you hear questions about what is the new normal? When will this normal? We are trying to figure out our signposts for moving forward and how to make sense of the world around us. So, they say that calamities are also opportunities. And I take this opportunity to really congratulate all those who took part in developing the 2020 Rome Charter, because I think they have done exactly that. They have seized the moment to present a new opportunity and an opportunity to think hard about the choices that we've made in the past, that we are making currently, and how to move forward, and to reconsider how we want to move forward and where we want to move forward to, and therefore to forge new signposts to steer our actions as we go forward. And the toll and the impact of the pandemic, of course, has affected being very quite different. In fact, different continents, different countries, different communities, but also in terms of the urban and rural settings. And the urban settlements are what have been impacted the most. And that and the narratives of cityscapes I have two things which have struck me in the last few months that I want to bring forth here because I think to me it gives a sense of why the charter is so urgent right now, why we need to go forward. One is directly related to the pandemic, and the other has nothing whatsoever to do with the pandemic, but it still is important. For the pandemic, I think all of us saw how, in being isolated in your own little space, disconnected from people, that was very troubling for people. And we saw how expressions, artistic expressions, cultural expressions, whether it was song or whether it was dance, whether it was music, performing arts, how they, whether they were on balconies or they were, at socially distanced gates outside someone's house, or they were in empty streets, or they were even digital. This somehow the cultural expressions gave us a sense of still being connected, of being part of this greater thing, which is humanity. And I think that sense of being connected also gave us a sense of comfort and relief that despite this, we were still connected and could move forward. The second thing, which has nothing to do with the pandemic, but which happened at the same time, were the actions that people started taking in many different countries to change the narratives in public spaces that were catalyzed by the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm referring, of course, to the attacks on and the defacement and taking down of statues that had dominated public spaces in cities as a means of rejecting the glorification of slave trading and slavers. And this suggests to me the urgent need to think of what cityscapes convey to people and who is commemorated and for what purpose, because some of those people did good things but also did bad things. So this is a challenge for cities in terms of what you want to portray, who the city is, because that is also part of the identity of what the city is. And these are things: who is recognized, who is present, who is absent, who is celebrated, and for what. Our public events in cities, our museums, our all kinds of engagements. It's important. And these are things which I did actually point out in two of my reports. One was on history and history teaching. The other was on memorialization, because that has a great deal to do with what people, as we just heard right now, they're different people who inhabit the city. The city is made up of different composite people. And of course, they don't have equal access and they're not equally projected, but their voices need to be there. We need to find ways of having multi-narratives going on about who we are, especially as cities become more and more complex. Cities are crucial to me because they are, I often say, they're like the social synapses of humanity. It's where they're receiving and sending out messages and signals, and new things are happening. And city life stimulates thinking, and thinking about ourselves, about the other, about the environment. And I think what makes cities exciting to me is not just the planned events and the plethora of choices that you have, which you do have, but the rich unknown of what might happen, the chance encounter, the spontaneous encounters that happen when you're in public spaces, or you chance upon a person or a scene or an image or a sound or maybe even a smell that triggers off a thinking process. So it does make you contemplate what is going on and think differently, even if that interpretation of what this means is only in communion with yourself. You need not have a discussion with others. And in all of this, of course, that makes our local and city authorities absolutely crucial, because they are the people who govern those public spaces and for human interaction and engagement. And of course, not everyone has equal access or opportunities to those spaces to be heard, to be reflected. And that is something that needs to be thought about. So these thoughts and the challenges that many cities have faced during the pandemic is one of the reasons I believe that the Rome Charter is an initiative whose time has more than come. And for some years now, those of you who know me, I've been saying you really have the trajectory on which we are in our ever faster, more globalizing world, in as we are pushed by and dependent on digital and other technologies. We need a pause button. We need to be able to say, hello, we need to get off this merry-go-round. We need to think, is this really the development we want? Is this development sustainable? Is it even desirable? And I think that is, in some ways, what the pandemic managed to do for us. It has pushed that pause button and made us reflect where perhaps we were not reflecting seriously before. And it's been at a devastating cost. We have 1 million plus deaths and still counting. So it's been a great cost, but I do strongly agree with the Rome Charter that the purpose itself of development must be, and here I'm quoting, to create an enabling environment for people to enjoy long, healthy, and creative lives and leave nobody behind, which was promised in the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. So we must stop thinking and conceiving and planning and implementing development as if it's in little silos. That approach simply does not work. We've seen that. We need a more holistic approach which brings together your economic, your social, your environmental concerns into one. And what binds all these different dimensions of our lives is culture. And so that is crucial. The cultural environment, the cultural rights is absolutely crucial. And we must remember the catchphrase, which is relatively new for me, but people must know it already, which is called EPIC. So I was wondering, what is EPIC? EPIC. EPIC is every policy is connected. So we're interconnected. And what interconnects this, of course, is culture. And culture is the crux for sustainable development, because for me, it depends on ensuring cultural rights for everyone. We need to ensure that every woman, man, otherly gendered person, child does enjoy the right to have access to take part in, and to contribute to cultural life in all its dimensions and all this, what it implies in terms on the basis of equality and non-discrimination. And I think the time has come to stop thinking of development as growth, which is how it's been seen. More, bigger, and everything that you have, I must have too. No, we don't need that. We need to, as the Charter stresses, develop human capabilities to do and to be all that we can. To be the best me, to be the best you, both individually and collectively. And in addition to the actions which are described in the Charter of discover, enjoy, create, share, and protect, I think one useful thing to think about may be the human rights approach to development, which I'm not good at these things, but people are good at acronyms, which is called PANEL by the UN system, PANEL, PANEL, like we're having here. So P stands for participation, which means recognizing that people themselves are key actors in their own development. They're not just passive recipients of commodities and services, and that participation must both be a means and a goal at the same time. So the process must include all stakeholders, and of course that means developing meaningful strategic partnerships with everybody who is concerned. The A stands for accountability, which is an obvious one. So you have to have laws and administrative procedures, practices, mechanisms, all of which ensure that everyone gets the entitlements to which they are due, and then to have ways to address the denials or violations of those rights should they take place. And to translate universal standards into locally determined benchmarks that make sense to people locally, to measure progress and to ensure the accountability continues. The N stands for non-discrimination and equality. And that demands, of course, that you have a special focus, as in all human rights approaches, to those who are most marginalized, those who are most vulnerable, those who are most excluded. Because nobody wants to be discriminated against. Nobody wants to be at the bottom of the pile. These are structures and systems that have put them there. E is empowerment, and that is probably the closest to the Rome Charter, the capabilities part of it. The empowerment means people's ability to enhance that ability to demand and enjoy their human rights and to claim rights and not just wait for policies and legislation and services. And in Urdu, we have a saying here which says, rights are not given, they are taken. And I agree that is what it means to be empowered, is to demand your rights and to demand changes and to be heard. And for development, processes always have to be locally owned if they are to be sustainable and long-term. And in the context of cities, the big challenge here is ensuring that development is owned by all the diversity of the people who are part of that city, who inhabit it or congregate there, and sometimes are even just passing through for a transient period. The L in panel stands, of course, for linkages, and those are linkages to human rights standards. So that must be the yardstick against which we look at all development. A few other points to consider as we look and take forward the Charter in terms of culture and cultural rights. First, I think it's good to recognize that culture is always, as already said by the father here, a dynamic process. This is not something like a pen that I will pass on to you. Culture is produced and reproduced in a constant state of every action that I take, every interaction I have, every thinking that I have, every value that I put forward. It is a site of contestation of ideas and contested values. And there's no doubt about it. A friend in Ireland once said something like, whenever you hear a clash of ideas, be sure you are in the presence of culture, because that is what happens. That is where we decide. As a site of exchange and recognition and contestation, it is culture that enables communities to continuously evolve and to surmount challenges and to move towards a greater inclusion of all, which is our goal here. Secondly, when there is no culture in the world that I know of or that I've read about or heard about that can claim that it has not at some point violated human rights. So the point is that all cultures are subject to different influences. They change over time, and all cultures must move towards a standard of human rights, inclusion of all, cultural democracy, and all the values that we're putting forward here through contestations, but also internal debates. They all have to move that way. Third, I think it's important that when taking actions to protect, as stated by the Rome Charter, just a footnote here, to cherish and preserve what has been made so that it can be discovered again. Please remember, not everything we inherit is necessarily good. And as a woman, I can guarantee that not everything in my cultural heritage was something I want to keep. So the right to cultural heritage must also mean the ability to question what we have received, the ability to modify, to change, to recreate that inheritance in the best way for us. And secondly, the right to cultural heritage is not about the past. It's not the right to the past. It's a right today as a pathway to the future. So we must embed in that, what is it that's so important about what we've inherited, whether it is from my own past or from others' past, from the heritage of others, that I want to transmit to future generations. Fourthly, in terms of discovering too, I think we have to be clear that no community, no city has just one culture, which has already been referred to. And the multiple cultures of different groups that inhabit the city, that are the citizens, which is where the word comes from, has to be a multi-directional sharing process. So it's not like this is culture and everybody should have access to it. We need to accept that we all have different cultural expressions, dynamics, etc., and they all have to be shared across on the basis of equal value. Cultural rights at the end, just to wrap up, to me are not about preserving culture or cultural heritage per se, but ensuring that the conditions necessary for everyone to continuously exercise human creativity, which is your capabilities, to create cultural life in all of its different versions and shapes and facets, and to create cultural meanings is available for all without distinction and discrimination. And so embodying in what is the embodiment of our joy and our fears, our hopes for the future, cultural engagements, whether that is as artistic or scientific expressions, whether it's by professionals, amateurs, or the general public and citizens, are all crucial for moving forward for the purpose of creating new meanings, which I understand is the basis and the purpose of the Charter. And the cultural expressions that allow meaningful interactions, especially amongst diverse people in cities, I think are what can help us transcend the cultural silos if these are supported by the city authorities and as discovered or is being indicated by the Charter, which has some specific policies that you may want to think of. The last thing which I wanted to say, continuing from the former speaker, just a small point about the digital world. So the digital world, having access to digital connectivity was something as Special Rapporteur, we often thought maybe we should put that down as a basic human right, given the changing world. However, having engaged recently with children's rights in the digital world, there's a lot we still have to think about in terms of how do we make that viable and safe for everyone? How do you protect the rights of some people? How do you ensure that the digital divide that already exists between countries, between communities, between genders, urban, rural locations, poor, non-poor communities, etc., doesn't add, that the focus on the digital does not add to the inequalities that already exist, and we bring it all together. So with that, I will conclude, and I look forward to the other talks and the discussion. Thank you.